I asked Tony Bennett why Lady Gaga never ages, and I wish I never heard his answer. What he told me that night shattered everything I thought I knew about her, about him, and about the dangerous, twisted bond they shared. It wasn't just about beauty or fame, it was about something far darker, something that shouldn't exist. If you're here, you want to know the truth, and I'll tell you. But trust me, what you're about to hear will haunt you. It all began with something simple, nothing more than a backstage meet and greet. I had just started working in the music industry and found myself in a room filled with stars. There was Tony Bennett, the legendary voice, and Lady Gaga, the modern-day icon. It felt surreal, being surrounded by such greatness. But what stood out wasn't just their talent, it was them. It wasn't obvious at first, but as the evening wore on, I couldn't ignore the way they interacted. They weren't just colleagues or performers, they shared something else. It wasn't the typical star-studded chemistry you see between celebrities on stage. No, it was something deeper. Something intimate in a way that made the air feel thick, almost charged. There was a moment that sticks with me more than anything. It happened after one of their duets. The crowd was roaring, but in the midst of all the applause, I noticed them standing side by side. For a second, it was as if the world around them didn't exist. Gaga was looking at Tony, and there was this look. It wasn't loving, it wasn't lustful. It was possessive, but not in a way that felt unhealthy. No, it was more than that. It was a look that suggested something far more dangerous. Something I couldn't quite put into words. And Tony, he looked at her, and for just a brief moment, his face was soft, almost trapped in a way I wasn't used to seeing from such a seasoned performer. It was as if they were sharing a secret, a deep, dark secret that no one else was supposed to know. I couldn't get the thought out of my head. What were they really sharing? Over the next few weeks, I couldn't stop thinking about that look. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't fascinated by their relationship. There was something magnetic about it. The way Tony always seemed to protect Gaga, the way she leaned into him like he was the only thing anchoring her to reality. It wasn't like a typical celebrity relationship. No, it felt more. But then, something else started to catch my attention. The way Gaga never seemed to age. Now, I'm not talking about the usual celebrity plastic surgery rumors. That's all surface level stuff. Gaga, she didn't just look great for her age. She didn't age at all. I'd seen her perform live night after night, under the brightest lights, hours of grueling work. Yet, each time she walked off stage, she looked exactly the same. Fresh, radiant, untouched by time. And it wasn't just a good makeup job or a perfect skincare routine. It was something else entirely. You know how some people have that kind of glow, that aura around them? She had it in spades. But I started to notice something even more unsettling. No one else seemed to acknowledge it. It was like they were all just so caught up in the spectacle of her fame that they overlooked what was right in front of them. She wasn't just beautiful, she was untouchable, as though time itself didn't apply to her. I'm not exaggerating. The more I saw of her, the more it became clear. Something wasn't right. Still, I couldn't understand what was happening. And I was too drawn to her energy, to the way she made everything else seem insignificant. The way she commanded a room without saying a word. But with every passing moment, it became harder to ignore the truth. Lady Gaga was not like the rest of us. And I couldn't help but wonder, what was Tony Bennett's role in all this? What was the real connection between them? I had to know more. But this was only the beginning. Something darker was about to unfold, and I couldn't look away. The deeper I got into their world, the more I realized something was wrong. At first, it was easy to ignore, to chalk it up to the strange allure that comes with fame. But the longer I was around, the more undeniable it became. Lady Gaga and Tony Bennett were not just two artists in the same industry. They were connected. It wasn't something you could see in the way they performed together, though that was mesmerizing enough. No, it was something that existed when the lights dimmed and the crowds were gone. It was in the quiet moments, the small private interactions when they thought no one was watching. There was a look they shared, a glance, an unspoken understanding that felt like a secret. And it wasn't just any secret, it was powerful. You could feel it in the room, thick and heavy, almost suffocating. It made everyone else in the room seem irrelevant, invisible, like the world was revolving around just them. Their bond was something you couldn't quite put your finger on, but it was there, lurking just beneath the surface. The more I watched, the more I realized I wasn't just seeing a performance, I was witnessing something much deeper, something darker. What struck me most, though, was how untouchable Gaga seemed. She was always the center of attention, but it wasn't the kind of attention I was used to seeing in the celebrity world. It wasn't just admiration, it was awe. People revered her, sure, but it was more than that. It was like they were afraid of her. She had this ability to draw people in, to command respect, and I started to wonder if maybe there was more to her than I thought, something I couldn't explain. I started paying closer attention to her interactions with others. It wasn't just Tony she had this strange connection with. There was something off about the way she interacted with everyone. It was as if people were drawn to her for reasons that went beyond her talent. There was an almost hypnotic quality to her. But with Tony, it was different. Every time they spoke, even in the smallest exchanges, there was a level of intimacy that I couldn't ignore. It wasn't the kind of bond you would expect between a mentor and a protege, even though that's what it looked like on the surface. No, it was something else entirely. Something much darker. Tony wasn't just guiding her. He was protecting her, as if he knew something the rest of us didn't. Something he wasn't willing to talk about. One night, after a performance, I found myself alone with Tony in the lounge, just the two of us. The conversation started innocently enough, talking about the usual. Music, the road, the grind. But I could see it in his eyes. He wasn't fully present. His mind seemed somewhere else. Somewhere dark. And that's when he said something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. You know, she's not like the rest of us, Tony said, looking over his shoulder as though to make sure no one was listening. The way he said it was so casual, so offhand, that I almost brushed it off. But there was something in his tone, a quiet desperation, that made me pause. Not like the rest of us, I repeated, unsure what he meant. He sighed, rubbing his temples. She's different, kid. You can't see it yet, but you will. You'll start noticing things that don't make sense. And when you do, you'll realize She's not bound by the same rules we are. Time doesn't work the same for her. And trust me, that's a blessing and a curse. I didn't know what to say. I just nodded, trying to process his words, but something in the pit of my stomach told me that I had just scratched the surface of something much darker than I had ever imagined. Over the next few days, I couldn't shake what Tony had said. The more I thought about it, the more the pieces started to fit together. Gaga's beauty, her energy, her unshakable confidence, it wasn't just a product of good genes or a strict beauty regimen. It was something else, something that couldn't be explained by normal means. She was ageless. I started to pay closer attention to her, and the more I watched, the more it became clear. She wasn't just a star. She was immortal. It wasn't just the way she looked. It was the way she moved, the way she carried herself. She didn't age. She didn't get tired. She didn't seem to have the same limitations that the rest of us did. And the longer I watched, the more I realized no one else seemed to notice. There was a strange, almost eerie detachment to her. It was like she was untouchable, unreachable, and yet she needed Tony. There was no doubt about that. Their bond was real, deep, and visceral. It wasn't just a partnership. It was something necessary for both of them. What Tony had said started to make sense. She wasn't bound by time. She was frozen in it. The realization hit me hard. But why? Why would anyone choose to stop time? To live like that? I couldn't understand it, but it was clear that whatever decision Lady Gaga had made, it came with consequences. I was in too deep now. I knew there was no turning back, that I had to find out what was really going on. And somehow, I knew that Tony's warning was just the beginning. The truth was darker than I could ever imagine, and I was starting to realize that I had a front row seat to something that could change everything. But I couldn't shake the question anymore. Why didn't she age? And then came the night I asked Tony. It had been weeks since Tony's cryptic warning, and the questions had only grown louder in my mind. Every time I saw Lady Gaga, every time I looked at her, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something. I wasn't seeing her beauty, her presence, her endless energy. It was too much, too perfect. It wasn't natural. I found myself obsessed. I couldn't look away. Every moment I spent in the same room as her, every performance she gave, the way she moved through life as though she were untouchable, it ate at me, gnawed at my thoughts. And it wasn't just her agelessness. It was the way people reacted to her, the way Tony protected her, but also seemed to be distant, like he knew something that I wasn't privy to. I couldn't stand it any longer. I had to ask. It was another late night after one of their performances. The crowd had long since gone home, the lights were dim, and the buzz of adrenaline had worn off. I found myself sitting alone in a quiet corner of the venue. The only sound, the distant hum of the air conditioning. Tony was there, his usual relaxed demeanor replaced with something I hadn't seen before. A weariness that didn't match the man I'd seen perform hours earlier. He seemed tired, worn down, as though the weight of something dark was dragging him into the earth. I knew I had to ask him. I knew that this moment, this question, had been waiting for too long. But the problem was, I wasn't sure if I was ready for the answer. Tony, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. There's something I have to ask you. He looked up, meeting my gaze, his expression unreadable. I could tell that he already knew what I was going to ask. It was as if he had been expecting this moment for weeks. "What is it, kid?" I hesitated, the weight of the question nearly suffocating. I could feel the words clogging up in my throat, but I forced them out anyway. Why doesn't Lady Gaga ever age? There it was. The question that had been plaguing my thoughts. The question I'd wanted to ask from the moment I'd seen her step on stage for the first time. But as soon as the words left my mouth, I knew I'd made a mistake. Tony's face went blank for a moment, his eyes narrowing as though he were deciding whether or not to answer. It wasn't the reaction I'd expected. I thought he'd chuckle, dismiss the question with some sort of playful banter. But that didn't happen. For a few seconds, I swear I saw a flicker of fear in his eyes. Something I had never associated with him. Something raw. Something dangerous. Then, without saying a word, Tony stood up and walked toward the window, staring out at the city lights below. His back was to me now, and for a long moment, all I could do was wait. I wasn't sure if he was going to speak, or if he had simply decided I wasn't ready for the answer. But then, he spoke. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "Because she doesn't. Not in the way you think." My heart stopped. The room felt like it was closing in on me. I'd asked the question expecting a simple answer, something I could brush off. But what he said, it wasn't an answer. It was a warning. Tony turned around to face me, his eyes intense. "She's not like the rest of us, kid," he continued, his voice low but steady. "She stopped aging a long time ago. She's not bound by the same rules we are. Time? It doesn't touch her. But you need to understand something. It's not a gift." The air around us seemed to shift, heavy with the weight of his words. I was still processing what he'd said, but I couldn't find the right words to respond. I wanted to ask more. I wanted to demand to know how, but I didn't. I was terrified to ask any more questions, but I had to know. "Why?" I managed to croak. Why would anyone do that to themselves? Tony's face softened for a brief moment. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You don't understand, kid. You can't understand. When you get to a certain point, when you have everything, you'll do anything to stay there. I don't know how it happened. I don't know the details, but I do know this. Once you make that choice, there's no going back. She's trapped in it, just like I am. We're all trapped. And now you're starting to see it too." The air felt cold. The kind of cold that settles into your bones. I didn't want to understand. I didn't want to know what he was saying. But deep down, I could feel it. I could feel the weight of it, pulling me in, pulling me deeper into something I didn't want to be a part of. And then came the most terrifying part of all. The realization that it wasn't just about Lady Gaga. It wasn't just about her agelessness. It was about a love that defied time. A love that was unnatural, one that had ensnared both of them. And now, me. "Tony, what did you mean when you said you were trapped?" I asked, my voice shaking. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at me with that same haunted expression, as though he'd said too much already. "I wish I could explain it to you, kid," Tony said, his voice barely audible. "But I can't. You'll have to figure it out for yourself. Just know this. Once you see it, once you understand it, there's no turning back. You'll never be the same. None of us will. I stared at him, feeling a cold chill wash over me. I'd asked the question I couldn't ignore, and now I was caught in a web I didn't understand. But I knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning, but this was just the start. What Tony revealed to me next would change everything. Tony's words echoed in my mind long after our conversation ended. You'll never be the same. What did he mean by that? Was I supposed to feel pity for Gaga? Or was he trying to warn me that the deeper I got into their world, the more I'd lose myself in it? I couldn't shake the feeling that the truth was something darker than I could even comprehend. For days, I tried to move on, to push the nagging thoughts aside, but it was impossible. Every time I saw Gaga, it was as though something about her grew more unnatural, more impossible. There were things about her I couldn't explain. Her radiant energy, her ability to outlast anyone on tour, her untouchable beauty. None of it made sense. People tried to rationalize it. She's just lucky, they'd say. Great genes, top-tier skincare routine. But that explanation felt hollow. I could feel it deep in my gut. This wasn't normal. And Tony had made it clear. It wasn't a gift. It was a curse. But what Tony didn't say that night, what he couldn't say, was that the curse wasn't just on her. It was on both of them. On all of us who had gotten too close to their twisted bond. And I was starting to realize that I was already too deep. I remember the first time I saw them alone after that conversation. It was backstage at a private event, late at night. The whole world outside the venue felt like a distant memory, and inside, I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning and the low murmur of people in the distance. Gaga and Tony were sitting together in the green room, talking quietly, but there was something off about it, something unsettling. I stood by the door, pretending to be busy with my phone, but I couldn't stop listening. I could barely make out the words, but their tone, heavy, urgent, told me everything I needed to know. They weren't talking about the show or the next performance. No, their conversation felt like a confession. Something hidden, something forbidden. I was so caught up in their exchange that I didn't hear the door open behind me. I turned around, startled, only to find Tony standing there, his eyes locked onto mine with that same piercing intensity. "I'm not blind, kid," he said softly. "I can see you're starting to figure it out." I wanted to lie, to tell him that I hadn't heard anything, that I wasn't interested in their business. But the truth was, I was too curious. My mind was racing, and I couldn't stop it. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice betraying me. Tony sighed, looking back at Gaga, who was sitting across the room, her back to us. "This is the part where you need to understand something," he said, his voice low and serious. "You can't be part of this world without paying the price. That's the deal we made." I didn't know what he meant by the deal, but something in my chest clenched. I could feel the walls closing in, and I knew that this was a moment I couldn't walk away from. "What kind of deal?" I asked, even though I was terrified to hear the answer. Tony's face grew darker. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "A deal with time. A deal with the thing that controls all of us." I didn't understand. Time? A deal with time? How could anyone make a deal with something so abstract, so intangible? But the way he said it, the weight in his voice, made me feel like I was on the edge of something so much bigger, so much darker than I had ever imagined. You mean, I stammered, trying to piece together the words. She made a deal to stop aging? Tony's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of real fear in them. Not just that, kid. She stopped time for herself, but it comes with a cost. A big one, and I'm paying that price too. The room seemed to shrink, the air growing heavy and thick. It was as though the very walls were closing in, pressing against me, trying to force the truth into my brain. But I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to know that what I was hearing was real. You're telling me that she's... I couldn't even finish the sentence. The words felt wrong, like they didn't belong in the same universe as my reality. Tony cut me off, his voice steady but dark. I'm telling you that she's trapped in a loop. A loop where time doesn't exist the same way it does for the rest of us. And the thing about a deal like that, kid, it doesn't come without consequences. And once you make that kind of choice, you're bound to it forever. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How could someone live like that? Trapped in time, forever young, but at the cost of everything else. And then Tony said something that chilled me to my core. The worst part is, I'm not just trapped because of her. I'm trapped because of the love between us. That's the deal. We're bound by it. And once you're in it, you can't get out. I could feel the weight of his words sinking into my chest, a cold, suffocating pressure that made it hard to breathe. The love between them? Was it really love or something darker? Something twisted, unnatural? I didn't know, but I was starting to realize that their bond wasn't something to be admired. It was something to be feared. I looked over at Gaga, still sitting across the room, seemingly oblivious to the conversation. But I couldn't shake the feeling that she knew exactly what was happening. She knew the truth, and she was living it. Tony turned to me then, his face more serious than I had ever seen it. You're getting too close, kid, he said quietly. I can see it in your eyes, but you need to stop asking questions. You need to get out while you still can, before it's too late. I didn't know what to say. I had asked for the truth, and now that I had it, I felt more lost than ever. I was too far in now, though. There was no turning back. And as I stood there, looking at Tony, at Gaga, I knew something I hadn't known before. I wasn't just an observer. I was becoming a part of whatever dark, twisted thing they had built. And there was no way out. But what Tony didn't know yet was that this deal, this curse, it was far bigger than either of them could control. I tried to push Tony's warning to the back of my mind, but it lingered there, gnawing at me like a constant ache. I had stepped into a world that wasn't mine, a world where time didn't work the way it was supposed to, where love was no longer pure, but twisted into something that bled into every aspect of life. A world where Lady Gaga and Tony Bennett had made a deal with forces they didn't fully understand. And now, I was caught in the middle of it. The more I saw, the more it became clear. Gaga's beauty wasn't just skin deep. She didn't just look young. She was immortal. And Tony? His connection to her wasn't just a friendship. It was something far more complex. I watched them in their quiet moments, when they weren't performing, when they thought no one was paying attention. And that's when I started to see the cracks in their world. The cracks that Tony had tried to warn me about. The cracks that nobody wanted to talk about. There was an overwhelming sense of exhaustion around Tony, one that never seemed to go away. He was always tired, always looking over his shoulder as if expecting something or someone to come for him. But the real toll was visible in his eyes. There was a hollow emptiness in them, a deep, unshakable sadness that went beyond the usual wear of a long career. It was as if he knew the price of what they had chosen, and it was beginning to break him down. I didn't understand it at first, but I began to notice the little things. The way Tony flinched when anyone mentioned Gaga's name. The way he would speak of her, but only in the most guarded terms, like he was afraid of saying too much. And the way people around them, their staff, their friends, even the other musicians, kept their distance from them. It wasn't just the fame, the mystique that they exuded. It was fear. Fear that something was wrong, that there was something dark about their relationship that was spreading like a disease, infecting everything in its path. There was a night, a particularly long one, when the truth became impossible to ignore. I had just finished working, another late night after a grueling show, and I was heading back to my hotel room when I ran into Tony outside the venue. He was pacing, as he often did when something was bothering him. I could tell he had been drinking. His movements were slower, more deliberate than usual. I walked up to him, not sure if he would even notice me, but he did. He stopped, his eyes meeting mine with a mixture of fear and resignation. "I see it in your eyes, kid," he said, his voice low and hoarse. "You're starting to see the cracks, aren't you?" I nodded, unsure of what I was supposed to say. I hadn't wanted to admit it, but it was true. I was beginning to understand that there was something far worse going on than I could have imagined. "You're seeing the cost, aren't you?" he continued. "The cost of immortality, the cost of what we've done, what she's done." He paused, and for a brief moment I thought he might say more. But then he just shook his head. "It doesn't stop, kid. It doesn't end. It just keeps going. And we're all part of it now." I didn't know what to say to that. The weight of his words pressed on me like a physical thing, heavy and suffocating. He was right. There was something insidious about this, about them, about their bond. The love that had trapped them both wasn't just a love, it was a curse. And now, I was tangled in it too. Tony seemed to read my thoughts, his expression darkening. "You think it's all just fun and games, don't you?" he said. "That it's just fame and money and beautiful music. But it's not. It's a prison, and the walls are closing in." I swallowed hard, trying to push down the growing sense of dread that was crawling up my spine. This wasn't a life I had imagined. This wasn't a life I had signed up for. I thought I was getting into the music industry to be part of something magical, to be close to the stars. But I was learning the hard way that some things were better left in the dark. The next morning, I overheard something that made my blood run cold. I was walking through the hotel lobby when I heard a group of people talking about Gaga. The words didn't make sense at first, but as I listened, I realized they were talking about her youth, or rather, her lack of aging. They were speculating, wondering how she managed to stay the same after all these years. The conversation was lighthearted at first, but then the tone shifted. One of them mentioned something about how it wasn't just her beauty. It was how other things never seemed to age. Her energy, her presence. And then they said something that made my stomach turn. She's not just frozen in time. She's something else. She's untouchable. I froze, my blood running cold as I heard the words. I knew then that the whispers weren't just about her youth. They were about something far worse, something I hadn't even begun to understand. But it was Tony's face that haunted me the most. His eyes, the way he looked at Gaga. He wasn't just a man in love. He was a man trapped. I had seen it in his every gesture, in his every word. And I was starting to realize just how deep his connection with her went. They were more than lovers, more than friends. They were bound by something that neither of them could escape. I was beginning to see it clearly now. This wasn't just a love story. This was a tragedy that no one could escape. And the worst part, I was stuck in it too. Once you saw it, once you understood, there was no walking away. You were part of the curse now. And the more I tried to distance myself, the more I realized there was no escape from Lady Gaga's world. Not for Tony, not for me, and certainly not for her. But the worst was yet to come. The price of immortality was about to be paid in a way none of us could ever have predicted. By now, I understood enough to know that whatever Tony and Gaga had was far from normal. But what I didn't understand was just how destructive it had become. The glamour, the applause, the eternal youth. It was all part of something sinister, something that demanded a price. And the longer I stayed around them, the more I started to feel that price. It wasn't obvious at first. It started small, an unease in the air, a heaviness that followed them wherever they went. It clung to their shows, their hotel rooms, even their laughter. There were moments when I'd catch Gaga staring into the distance, eyes unfocused, as if she was listening to something no one else could hear. Her smile would fade, just for a second, and in that brief flicker, she looked ancient. Not old, ancient. Like she'd lived 1,000 lifetimes and remembered every painful detail. Tony noticed it too. He became restless, jumpy. Sometimes he'd forget things mid-sentence, as though the memories were being stolen from him. He'd sit at the piano, fingers trembling, playing notes that didn't sound like music anymore, just fragments of something broken. I saw him one night, whispering under his breath, his voice cracked with fear. I couldn't make out the words, but one thing was clear. He wasn't talking to himself. He was begging someone, or something, for mercy. That's when I realized that the price of immortality wasn't just a toll on the soul. It was parasitic. The deal Gaga made didn't just keep her young. It consumed the life around her. Everyone who loved her, everyone who got close, slowly began to fade. Tony wasn't aging naturally. He was being drained. His vitality, his memories, his sanity, it was all being pulled out of him piece by piece to keep her ageless. I tried to convince myself it wasn't real, that I was imagining it. But then it started happening to me, too. I'd wake up exhausted, drained. Like I hadn't slept in days, I'd lose track of time. I'd feel my thoughts slipping, just like Tony's. And every time I saw Gaga, the feeling intensified, like something inside me was being pulled towards her. Her eyes were the worst part. When she looked at you, it felt like she was seeing through you, peeling back layers of who you were, until nothing was left but the parts she could use. It dawned on me that this wasn't a partnership anymore. It was a feeding, and Tony had been the one she'd fed on the longest. He had given her everything, his time, his devotion, his very essence. And in return, She stayed frozen in perfection while he withered behind the scenes. But what terrified me most wasn't the feeding. It was the realization that she didn't even mean to do it. This wasn't malice. It was need. Gaga needed him to survive, just like she now needed me. The bond between them wasn't love. It was dependence. A haunting cycle that blurred the line between devotion and destruction. And once you became part of that cycle, you couldn't leave. I saw it in Tony's eyes every time he tried to pull away. The pain, the terror, it wasn't her voice that kept him close. It was the invisible thread that bound them, the deal that had rewritten their very souls. The closer I got to understanding it, the worse it got. I started hearing things when I was alone. Whispers, faint and desperate, always just out of reach. Sometimes they sounded like Tony. Sometimes they sounded like her. Other times they didn't sound human at all. I remember the last time I saw Tony before everything changed. He looked at me like a man standing at the edge of a cliff. "You see it now, don't you?" he asked quietly. "You see what it takes to keep her alive?" I couldn't even answer. My throat felt like it was closing up. I wanted to deny it, to pretend I didn't understand, but I did. He smiled weakly. "You're in it now, too. Once you know, you can't walk away. She won't let you." I left that night, my mind spinning, my body weak. And even as I walked away, I could feel it. Something pulling at me, tugging me back toward her. It wasn't love, it wasn't fascination, it was hunger, hers or mine. I couldn't tell anymore. But just when I thought it couldn't get worse, I uncovered the most terrifying truth of all. The more I tried to distance myself, the more I realized it was impossible. Every time I thought I could escape, every time I tried to step away from the nightmare that had become my reality, the pull grew stronger. It wasn't just physical. It was in my head, my thoughts. Gaga's presence was like an invisible force, always there, always pushing me back into their world, and no matter how far I ran, I knew I would never truly be free. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about what I had become. I had been pulled into something so dark, so twisted, that the lines between right and wrong had blurred. Tony had warned me, told me I'd never be the same. But I didn't listen. Now, as I walked deeper into their world, I understood exactly what he meant. I could feel the cracks in everything around me. The relationship between Tony and Gaga wasn't just fractured, it was breaking. Every day, something new seemed to unravel. I saw it in Tony's face, in the way he moved, the way he spoke. He was barely holding it together, and I couldn't tell if he was scared of what was happening, or if he had simply accepted that there was no way out. The worst part was seeing Gaga through his eyes. She wasn't just the untouchable pop star anymore. She wasn't the woman everyone thought she was. She was something else, a creature, a force that needed to feed. She wasn't just using Tony to stay young. She was draining him of everything that made him who he was. His life, his spirit, his soul. And she wasn't even aware of the destruction she was causing. Not fully. I couldn't ignore it any longer. I saw the toll it was taking on him. His voice cracked more often. His hands trembled when he played the piano. He couldn't remember the words to songs he'd sung for decades. But even more disturbing was the way he looked at Gaga, like he was both terrified and entranced by her. There was something in his eyes that I couldn't ignore. Something that made me sick to my stomach. That night, After another haunting performance, I saw it all unravel. We were backstage again, but this time, the air was different. It was charged, like a storm was coming, ready to break. Gaga was sitting alone, staring at the floor, while Tony stood by the window, his back to her. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could feel the tension in the room. And then, as if on cue, Gaga stood up and walked over to him. Her voice was soft, almost pleading. "Tony, you know what we have to do, don't you? We've made it this far. We're bound together. It's the only way we can survive." Tony didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, staring out into the distance. When he finally spoke, his voice was broken. "I don't know if I can do this anymore, Gaga." His words were barely a whisper. "You're taking everything from me, and I'm not sure I can keep giving it." For the first time, I saw the fear in Gaga's eyes. It was fleeting, gone in an instant, but I saw it. She was terrified. Terrified of losing him, terrified of losing what they had, even if it was a trap, even if it was a curse. And that was when I realized the truth. She wasn't just dependent on Tony. She was desperate for him. Without him, she wouldn't survive. Without him, she would fall apart. And that was when it hit me. This was never about love. It wasn't about devotion or passion. It was a cycle of survival. A dark, unholy bond that kept them alive but destroyed everything around them. It was a twisted game, one that had no winners, only casualties. I turned away, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't watch anymore. I had been a part of this madness long enough, and I was done. But as I turned to leave, I felt it again. The pull, that invisible force, that hunger pulling me back into their world. I could feel it in my bones, in my very soul. I was caught in their web now, and there was no escape. I couldn't break free. And the worst part? I wasn't sure I even wanted to anymore. The love, the curse, the cycle, it was too powerful. I had seen the damage it did to Tony. I had seen the way it fed on him. But I couldn't bring myself to leave, not yet. Not while there was still more to understand. And as I walked away from the two of them, locked in their endless, destructive dance, I knew one thing for sure. I would never be the same again. I asked Tony Bennett why Lady Gaga never ages. And now, I wish I'd never heard the answer. Final payoff. I asked Tony Bennett why Lady Gaga never ages. And I wish I'd never heard the answer. What they shared wasn't love. It was a curse. A bond forged in darkness, kept alive by time itself. Gaga wasn't just ageless. She was a prisoner, trapped by the very thing that made her immortal. And Tony? He was bound to her in ways I couldn't even begin to comprehend, losing himself more every day. The deal they made wasn't just with time. It was with something far older, something that needed to feed. The price was their souls, their lives, their very essence. And now, I'm caught in it too. There's no way out. Once you know the truth, once you see behind the veil, you can never go back. I'll never be the same. The curse has me now, and it won't let go.